There is a zombie apocalypse on Earth, but people still confront each other. Hello all. This is Jacobson and this is a brief retelling of the 7th and 8th episodes of the 5th season of the zombie series The Walking Dead. You can see the previous episodes at the links in the video description. Once this video gets 200 likes, I will release the next installment. Enjoy watching it.
Daryl, Tyrese and Sasha strengthen the church by building barricades from the wreckage of the corpse Pargana's bench, while Gabriel watches the desecration with horror. Meanwhile, Michonne and Rick are clogging up the windows with boards. Michonne suggests Rick go to Atlanta instead, but Rick says he owes Carol. Rick, Daryl, Tyrese, Sasha, and other go to Atlanta. While Carl and Michonne board up the windows, Gabriel furiously scrubs the floor, trying in vain to remove the blood stains left after the massacre of Garrett's team. On the way to Atlanta, Tyrese tries to comfort Sasha in connection with Bob's death. "Don't," she says. At the hospital, Beth walks into Carol's room and sees her lying unconscious in bed. Beth silently looks at Dr. Edwards when he comes to check on a patient. Elsewhere, Eugene is lying on the road, still unconscious from Abraham's beatings. Abraham is kneeling nearby and silently looks ahead. Rosita tries to give Abraham water, but he waves her off, then stands up and looms over her menacingly. Maggie points a gun at Abraham and orders him to sit down. At a warehouse in Atlanta, Rick plans an attack on a hospital. Tyrese suggests an alternative plan to kidnap 2 Dawn officers and arrange a prisoner exchange. Rick is skeptical that the plan will work, but agrees to it after Daryl gives him support. Back at the church, Carl lays out weapons in front of Gabriel and encourages him to choose one of them for self-defense. Noticing that Gabriel is worried about the massacre, Carl reminds Gabriel that Gareth and his men were liars and murderers, and Gabriel reluctantly chooses a machete. At the hospital, Beth listens as Officer O'Donnell suggests Dawn disconnect Carol from the life support machine to save resources. Beth protests, but Dawn takes O'Donnell aside. After O'Donnell leaves, Dawn privately instructs Beth to rescue Carol on her own and gives Beth the key to the medicine cabinet. Dawn then receives radio messages from Officer Shepard about shots being fired nearby and tells him to investigate with Officer Lamson. Back on the road, Maggie stays with Eugene and Abraham while the rest of the group goes to replenish water supplies in a nearby stream. On the way, Tara defends Eugene for being weak and defenseless. He had one skill that helped him survive, she argues. Should we really be mad at him for taking advantage of him? Near the truck, Maggie builds an awning over Eugene to shelter him from the sun. She then rushes to Abraham, who is still kneeling in a catatonic pose. "Come to terms with yourself," she says. "You're not the only one who lost something today." At the hospital, Beth visits Dr. Edwards and asks him what medication he would inject Carol with. He advises 5 milligrams of epinephrine. After discovering that the water in the stream is polluted, Rosita creates a water filter using a technique she learned from Eugene. To everyone's surprise, Glenna discovers fish in the stream. Meanwhile, Shepard and Lamson investigate the shots and find No and in the alley. When they grab him, Rick's group ambushes them and holds them at gunpoint. But a hospital car arrives at the scene with another officer, Licari, and rescues Shepard and Lamson. Rick's group opens fire and pursues the officers, eventually catching all 3. Rick's group brings the captured officers to the warehouse. Shepard explains that their hostage plan won't work because Dawn doesn't consider them valuable because of their plot to overthrow her. Lamson, however, assures Rick that the deal will work if they talk to Dawn properly. "Let me help you," he offers, declaring his kinship with Dawn. At the creek, Glenn, Rosita and Tara kill walkers, and make a fishing net out of their clothes. After successfully catching a fish, Glenn tells Rosita that wherever their group is, they will need her skills, and asks if she agrees. "I'm in," she says. At the church, Michonne checks on Gabriel in the abbess room. He pretends to be tired and leaves. Left alone, he resumes his work, knocking down the floorboards with a machete, wanting to secretly leave the church. At the hospital, Beth asks an assistant to distract attention while she steals epinephrine from the medicine cabinet and injects it to Carol. Returning to the church, Gabriel escapes by going down under the floor. Getting out, he accidentally steps on a nail, but then, saving steps, goes into the forest. At the warehouse, Lamson advises Rick to negotiate with Dawn. He explains that Dawn won't agree to the hostage deal at first, but then she will eventually agree. The Face thanks Lamson and offers him water. Gabriel limps through the woods and is attacked by a walker. He knocks him down and picks up a stone to kill him, but then notices a crucifix around his neck. With tears in his eyes, he lowers the stone and hobbles away. While Sasha is guarding Lamson, he says that he saw a former colleague who turned into a walker melt into the asphalt on the street. Sympathizing, Sasha offers to shoot the walker to put an end to his suffering. On the road, Eugene finally wakes up, and Maggie hurries to him. Glenn, Tara and Rosita return with fresh fish and water. Tara finds Yo-Yo. Back at the warehouse, Lamson directs Sasha to the window and tells her where to point the gun. While she is looking through the scope, Lamson hits Sasha's head against the window. When Sasha is lying on the ground, bleeding and unconscious, Lamson runs away. Rick runs, and Bob tries to free himself from the handcuffs. Rick jumps into a police car and quickly catches up with him. He gets into the car and warns Bob to stop. Bob ignores the warning and Rick hits him with the car. Bob says his back is broken and begs to go back to the hospital. Rick refuses, to which he replies that the group is doomed and they will die trying to take over the hospital. Rick shoots him in the head and tells him to shut up. At the school where the Terminus residence camp used to be located, walkers gather at the door while Father Gabriel inspects the scene. He finds photographs, a Bible with Mary's name on the inside cover, and finally the remains of Bob's leg in the barbecue pit. He angrily overturns the pit and cries. While he is doing this, the walkers are released and chase him. He heads into the forest, where he leans against the tree on which the incision was made. He continues walking towards the church and briefly stops in front of a familiar place where his parishioners were trying to get inside when they were surrounded by walkers. Gabriel calls Carl and Michonne to let him in, as the walkers begin to push against the barriers set up by the survivors. Michonne has to chop down the wooden board that closes the door, but she manages to open it just in time. A small horde of walkers makes their way inside, and Carl Ridiculous begins to destroy them. However, they are quickly overtaken, and they retreat to the church office. Gabriel directs Carl, who is carrying Judith, to the hole in the floor that he used to escape, followed by Michonne and Gabriel himself. Outside, they deal with walkers, and then board up a church with zombies locked inside. Rick returns to the old building and tells the group that he had to kill Bob. The other two officers explain that if Dawn finds out how he was killed, she will take it personally. So they agree to tell Dawn that Bob was taken by walkers. This will allow Rick to get inside with minimal violence. Back at the hospital, Dawn continues to try to contact her officers by radio. Beth asks her if anything is wrong, and they chat a little while Beth cleans Dawn's office. In the office, she finds a picture of Dawn with Captain Hansen, the officer who used to be in charge. Dawn says that he was her mentor and friend, and that she misses him. Beth asks what happened, and Dawn tells her that he has lost sight of the risk-benefit ratio of the operation and the officers below him have stopped supporting him. In the church, Carl and Michonne sit with Gabriel and Judith and wait. Gabriel admits that he went to school to make sure they were telling him the truth. Walkers begin to enter through the boarded-up doors, but before they can do so, Abraham's group appears in a fire truck and drives right into the doors. Maggie informs them that Eugene lied about Washington. Then Michonne informs Maggie that Beth is alive, she is being held at the Grade Memorial. The group collectively decides to go after her. At the hospital, O'Donnell begins to scold Percy for not sewing up the hole on his sleeve properly. Beth looks at it. Oh, Donnell asks if she knows how to sew, but Dawn calls her off. Beth sits on the edge of the elevator shaft and looks down. Dawn arrives and they begin to discuss the situation. Beth expresses disappointment that Dawn insists it won't always be like this and tells her that the world won't magically get better. In the course of it, Donnell finds them talking. He says it's time to change something, that either Dawn admits the situation to the rest of the officers, or he will do it. She points a gun at him and they fight. He chases her, knocks her gun down the elevator shaft, and they fight. He begins to get the better of her, and Beth comes to the rescue. When he is distracted by her, it gives Dawn the opportunity to regain the advantage, and the two of them dump him into the mine. Dawn comes to Carol's room, where Beth is leaning against the wall. Dawn tells her it's okay to cry, and Beth replies that she's not crying anymore. Dawn drinks and Beth tells her that she didn't cover for Beth to protect her, she did it to protect herself. Beth tells her that she's going to leave as an other, but Dawn says she won't come back, they always come back, and that she knows Beth knows Carol, and that they both have to stay. She tells Beth that the two dirty cops she had a hand in killing were bad people, and the world lost nothing when they died. Sasha has a sniper rifle on the roof next to the hospital. Tyrese doesn't want her to blame herself for Bob's betrayal and death. He tells Sasha a story about how he pretended that he wanted to kill Martin, but could not, and then he appeared in the church. In the end Sasha killed him. He tells Sasha that maybe the world hasn't changed them and that's a good thing. She replies that it's good that Tyrese has stayed the same, but she can't be like that anymore. Later, Daryl joins her on the roof. Rick is on the street below and approaches the police car with his hands up. He calls them by name and introduces himself. He says he has come to make an offer. He is told to lay down his weapons, and he does so, but the snipers point their sights at the police officers' heads. The officers approach Rick, and he offers an even exchange, 2 people for 2 people. When the officers ask where Rick's men are, Sasha destroys the walker with 1 shot from a sniper rifle. Rick says they're close, and that he'll wait until they get in touch on the radio. Back at the hospital, Beth changes into her usual clothes, hiding the scissors in her wrist. Carol has already woken up, and Beth takes her out into the corridor, where all Dawn's officers are standing, followed by Dr. Edwards. Rick and his group are taken out into the corridor, and everyone collectively holsters their weapons. 2 policemen, as promised, lie about Lamson's death. They change Lakari to Carol, and then Shepard to Beth. When the group is about to leave, Dawn decides to change the deal and demands that Noah stay too. She says the officers died trying to save him. When Rick starts to object, but also voluntarily agrees to stay, Beth goes to hug him goodbye, and when Dawn tells him "I knew you'd be back." Beth, concerned about this statement, approaches Dawn and says "Now I understand," after which she stabs her with scissors, but this leads to Dawn instinctively shooting Beth in the head, killing her. Daryl, ignoring Dawn's shock and her plea for mercy, shoots Dawn in the head in response, killing her. The officers and Rick's group pull out guns and point them at each other, but Shepard orders the cops to retreat, ending the standoff. Rick's group is devastated and cries at the sight of Beth's body lying on the ground next to Dawn's body. Shepard, supported by Edwards, offers Rick and the group to stay in the hospital, but Rick refuses, offering instead to take everyone from the hospital who wants to leave, but also decides to leave the hospital with Rick's group. When the group leaves the hospital, Rick shakes his head in Glenn's direction, trying to show what happened. Daryl carries Beth's body out of the building, Maggie sees it and falls to the ground, crying tears, and Glenn comforts her, also crying. The whole group stands in silence and sorrow. Morgan finds his way out of the woods and stands where Gabriel used to stand in front of the school. He stops over a walker who is lying on the ground, and relieves him of his suffering, and goes on to the church. There he sets up an altar and sits down to pray. After that, he looks around at the carnage and laughs until he finds Abraham's note for Rick on a map of Washington, D.C.